All right, let's jump right in. Today we're going to talk about a bacterium that is a genuine clinical paradox, and it's one that every single one of us in the microbiology world really needs to have on our radar. Lacticaseibacillus rhamnosus. So, think about this. On one hand, it's one of the most popular probiotics on the planet, right? It's in all sorts of health products. But then, on the other hand, it can be a really nasty opportunistic pathogen causing things like bacteremia and even endocarditis. That is the paradox we're going to unravel today.
Just so you know, all the information we're covering here was sourced using Gemini Deep Search. And if you want to dive into the primary literature yourself, we've linked our full notebook with all the sources down in the description for you.
So here's what we've got on tap. We're going to start with this tale of two faces, then get into the nitty-gritty of identifying it in the lab. After that, we'll look at how this probiotic can actually turn against a patient, talk about the big challenges in treatment, and wrap things up with a really important discussion on what's called probiotic stewardship.
Okay, so first up, this whole tale of two faces. How can one single organism be both a helpful friend and, well, a dangerous foe?
Okay, so the first thing we absolutely have to get straight is its name. Now, you probably know this bug as Lactobacillus rhamnosus, but back in 2020, it got a new name, Lacticaseibacillus rhamnosus. And look, this isn't just about being picky with taxonomy. That reclassification was based on deep phylogenomic analysis, and it has huge implications for how we look back at decades of research on the whole Lacticaseibacillus CLSI group.
And that complexity with the name, it creates real headaches for us at the bench. Trying to identify this thing can feel like a genuine detective story.
So you get a plate, the initial workup, it looks pretty standard, doesn't it? You see gram-positive rods, maybe in chains. They're growing as these small gray alpha hemolytic colonies. And it's catalase negative. But right there, that's where the alarm bells should start going off. Because you could be walking right into a classic misidentification. And this is the big pitfall, right here. With a workup like that, it is so easy to call this a viridans group streptococcus. And that's a mistake that can have really serious consequences for the patient's treatment.
So, how do we tell them apart? Well, the definitive clue is fascinating. Morphology can fool you, but the one thing that will give it away at the bench is its built-in, high-level resistance to vancomycin. We're talking an MIC greater than 256 milligrams per liter. That is the bright red line that separates it from a vanco-susceptible viridans strep.
Now, to be absolutely sure, you've got to go molecular. But, and this is a big but, 16S rRNA sequencing alone won't cut it. It's just not specific enough. It'll only get you to the Lacticaseibacillus CLSI group. What you really need for a clinical diagnosis is a species-specific PCR. And get this, for epidemiological tracing, you can even use strain-specific PCR to link an infection right back to the commercial probiotic the patient was taking.
Which brings us right to the core of this whole paradox. How on earth does a good probiotic become a bad pathogen? Well, the answer is often iatrogenic, which is just a way of saying the illness is an unintended consequence of medical care itself.
And we're not talking about minor infections here. Lacticaseibacillus rhamnosus can cause a whole range of serious problems, with bacteremia and infective endocarditis being the absolute biggest threats. In fact, a 2024 review found that it's responsible for almost a quarter of all endocarditis cases caused by Lactobacillus species. That's a huge number.
Now this next number, this should make every single one of us stop and think. Almost 1 in 5 patients with Lactobacillus endocarditis had recently been taking probiotics. This isn't just some theoretical what-if scenario. This is a real, documented, and, most importantly, preventable cause of a life-threatening infection.
Okay, so we have a patient with a serious infection. How do we treat it? Well, this is where things get really tricky, and it all starts with that big vancomycin problem we talked about earlier.
Let me be crystal clear on this. Vancomycin, the go-to empiric drug for so many gram-positives, is completely useless against Lacticaseibacillus rhamnosus. It's not just a bad choice, it's contraindicated. Using it is a major therapeutic error, plain and simple.
And to make our lives even more complicated, EUCAST doesn't have any established clinical breakpoints for this bug. What does that mean for us in the lab? It means you can't just send out a report that says S, I, or R. You have to report the quantitative MIC value and then provide some real interpretive guidance. This is where the clinical microbiologist becomes absolutely indispensable to the clinical team.
So what should that guidance be?
Well, if we look at the Dutch guidelines from Swab, they give us a pretty good model. For endocarditis, they recommend a long course of high-dose IV amoxicillin. We're talking 4 weeks for a native valve, 6 for a prosthetic. And they also suggest considering gentamicin for the first couple of weeks to get that synergistic effect.
And that approach really lines up with what we see internationally. The consensus is pretty clear. High-dose beta-lactams, like ampicillin or penicillin G, are the way to go for these serious infections. And just as important is the what not to use list. Definitely no vancomycin, no metronidazole, and you'll want to be very careful with cephalosporins and fluoroquinolones too. So here is probably the most practical, life-saving thing you can take away from this entire explainer. Add a comment like this to your lab report. Something simple. This one sentence does so much. It steers the clinician away from a huge therapeutic mistake, points them in the right direction, and flags that they really need to call you for a consult.
But treating the infection is really only solving half the problem. That brings us to our final and maybe most important topic, prevention. And this goes way beyond just standard infection control. It's really a call for a whole new mindset.
The most powerful way to prevent these infections is something called probiotic stewardship. The evidence is piling up and it's pretty clear. For certain high-risk patient groups, these live probiotics should essentially be considered contraindicated. And here's the real kicker. The very patients who are often given probiotics are the exact same ones who are most at risk for getting a devastating infection from them.
So this leads to the big question I want to leave you with. I want you to really think about your own institution. Is your hospital practicing probiotic stewardship? Do you have any kind of formal policy about who gets probiotics and, more importantly, who doesn't?
We'd love to get a conversation going on this. Seriously, share what your hospital is doing in the comments below. Let's learn from each other because this is a huge patient safety issue. And of course, if you found this useful, please subscribe for more of these clinical explainers. Let us know what you think, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.